Clarity without action is just an interesting conversation. Action without clarity is an exhausting treadmill. And most leaders that I work with are stuck in one of those two places. Either they see what needs to shift, they have the insight, they know it's misaligned, but they can't seem to move, or they're moving nonstop, taking action every day, checking things off, but it feels like friction instead of momentum. That's what I want to think out loud about today with you, because I don't think the issue is a lack of clarity or a lack of action. I think the issue is that we've confused urgency with panic, and we've confused movement with progress. So we end up taking action that creates more fragmentation instead of more integration. We end up moving, but not towards what actually matters. If we haven't met, I'm Chris Quintana. I work privately with business owners and executives on high performance, especially when leadership feels heavy. And this pattern shows up over and over. So let me tell you about a client I worked with recently. She had all the insights. We'd done the work. She could see exactly where she was compensating instead of recalibrating. She could name her patterns. She understood what conditions supported her best work, but she couldn't take a step. Every time she got close to making a decision, she'd freeze. Not because she didn't know what to do, but because she was terrified of choosing wrong again. And this pattern shows up repeatedly. Leaders who've expanded and gotten burned, who made a move that cost them, who trusted their instinct and it didn't work out. So now they're paralyzed, not by lack of clarity, by fear of misstepping. And that fear creates its own kind of exhaustion. But there's another pattern that's just as common. Leaders who are always in motion, taking action, making decisions, driving forward. But when you ask them what they're moving towards, they can't quite say. They just know they need to keep moving, like a shark that needs to breathe. Because stopping feels dangerous. Because if they slow down, things might fall apart. And here's what I've noticed about both of these patterns. They're both rooted in some confusion. We've mistaken urgency for panic. Now, let me explain what I mean. Urgency says this matters now. It's focused, it's clear, it's grounded in necessity. Panic says everything matters right now. It's scattered, it's reactive, it's grounded in fear. And we've been living in panic mode for so long that we don't even recognize urgency anymore. We think urgency means stress, pressure, overwhelm, moving fast. But real urgency is actually calm. It's clear about what requires attention and what doesn't. It's focused on what's necessary, not just what's loud. So when I work with leaders who are either frozen or moving nonstop, the first question I ask is, what actually requires movement this week? Not what feels urgent, not what other people are pushing for, not what do you think you should be doing? What actually needs to happen for you to move toward the direction you've said matters? What's the single most effective action you could take? And most of the time, the answer is way less than you think. Because here's the thing. Not everyone feels urgency let me start that again. Not everything that feels urgent is actually necessary. Let me repeat that. Not just because I didn't get it right, but let me repeat that. Make sure we actually got that. Not everything that feels urgent is actually necessary. Necessary means required for the direction you're going. Urgent means demanding your attention right now. They are not the same thing. I had a client who was carrying a list of 15 urgent priorities, 15 things that all felt like they had to happen immediately. And my client was exhausted. They were scattered, overwhelmed. So we slowed it down and asked a different question. Not what's urgent, but what's necessary. What actually has to happen for you to move in the direction you've said you're going? And when we filtered through that lens, the list went from 15 to 7, and then from 7 to 3. 3 things that were actually required for them to move forward. The rest? Inherited urgency. Urgency that came from other people's timelines, other people's priorities, old patterns of what they thought they should be doing. And here's what happened when they focused on those 3 necessary things. They hit their goals. They still hit their goals, but they stopped fragmenting themselves to get there. Here's an example of how this kind of inherited urgency can impact leaders and their teams. I once worked for someone who, it seemed to me, prioritized by urgency. What I saw was that everything was last minute, and so everything was rushed and stressful and panicked. And I do not work that way. What I think it might actually have been was she was used to doing everything herself. And so even though she now had a team, she felt the pressure of there's this many things to do and it's only me and I have to get that done and this is how that feels. And she carried that forward to the team. So here I was, I pace my days, I pace my projects. I know what actually has to happen and when to move things forward and hit our targets. And I just don't get frazzled about the things that are taken care of. And so she saw that I didn't panic. And in my employee review, what she used to say multiple times, multiple reviews, she would say that I didn't understand the urgency of our work. It wasn't because I was ever late, but it was because I didn't match her energy and her panic if I knew something was in hand. It was not a very pleasant experience as a team member. But as I said, I think she had been used to working alone. And so she assessed the urgency with a team the same way as when it was for one person. So I inherited that stress because she was working from outdated rules. So here's a question worth sitting with. How much of your urgency is real? How much is inherited or maybe even manufactured? How much are you doing because it actually matters to the direction you're going? How much are you doing because you think you have to, because someone else expects it, because we've always done it this way? Because if you're moving on inherited urgency, you're going to exhaust yourself and you're not going to get where you actually want to go. You'll be busy, productive, checking things off, but you won't be moving toward anything that integrates with who you are with what you're building. Here's where this can get a little tricky. Even when you know what's necessary, when you've inherited, I'm having trouble today. My thoughts are getting a little scrambled. Even when you know it's necessary, when you've filtered out the inherited urgency and you're clear on what matters, you still have to start with your actual capacity. Not your aspirational capacity, which could be here, but your actual capacity, what you can handle right now. Not what you can handle if you're pushed, but your real capacity today. And here's what keeps coming up. Leaders who are clear on what needs to happen, they've done the work, they know the direction, but they design action plans based on who they think they should be, not who they actually are right now. They assume energy they don't have. They assume bandwidth that's already allocated. And they assume support that's not in place yet. And then they wonder why aligned action still feels so forced. Here's the truth. Aligned action has to fit your current reality, not your future reality, not your ideal reality. your current reality. What's your energy actually like right now? Not on your best day, but on your average Wednesday. What's your team actually capable of holding right now? Not after you train them better, right now. What resources do you